So, guys, I was checking Quick Dick McDick. He was one of our guests here a while back, and he had a video on about carbon tax. Now, I know we've talked about the carbon tax a bit, Bridget, and what I want to do is we'll play his YouTube video on this how they're implementing a carbon tax up in Canada. And I want everybody, I learned a lot from this and just how absurd, how absolutely absurd this is. And we'll field questions after the video. Guys, go ahead and roll that YouTube video, please.
Quick Dick McDick coming to you from Saskatchewan here today. And on this segment of Thoughts from the Barn, we're talking about the Canadian federal carbon tax. So right now in Canada, this guy and this guy have set a price on pollution at this much per ton. That means that anytime you drive one of these, or these, you have to pay a carbon tax on the fuel that you burn while driving. Whenever you turn anything on that requires this, you pay a carbon tax on it. But whenever you use things like this to have a hot shower, or this to heat your house so you can survive in our cold climate, you pay a carbon tax on it. And then, just when you feel like you couldn't be taxed anymore, this guy and this guy charge you this on top of the carbon tax. That's right, you pay a sales tax on top of the carbon tax. It's a tax on a tax. And just when you think it couldn't get any worse, this guy and this guy are going to increase the carbon tax on April 1st by this much per ton, making it this much per ton. Is it convenient that they do this every April Fool's Day? It's like they're laughing at us. Then on top of this, for the carbon taxes here, they want to add this, which is a whole new set of regulations that's going to make using this, and this more expensive. Now, there's a whole bunch of people out there that say, hey, Quick Dick, you get one of these to offset the carbon tax that you pay. You get more back than you put into it. But even this guy says that this year, houses alone across the prairie will experience a net loss with the rebate factored in of this much. And in 2030, we'll experience a loss with the rebate factored in up to this much when their carbon tax hits this much. Now, the problem with all these numbers that people keep throwing around and what the price of the carbon tax actually does is nobody takes into consideration how it affects the price of this. Now, from an ag perspective, we've always had to pay a carbon tax on stuff like this and this that we use to heat our shops, barns, and of course to dry grain with. And even on the electricity we use to run these things to keep these little guys warm. Do you believe this? So everybody's all happy that Bill C-234 passed the House of Commons and is headed to the Senate now, and hopefully will get approved and get royal assent. You know what Bill C-234 is, right? That's what exempts on-farm natural gas and propane use from the carbon tax. But don't forget that this lady right here, our federal ag minister, voted against it passing. Just remember that Bill C-234 isn't enough. Now, I say it's not enough because whenever we've got to hire these, or these to deliver to or take from the farm, they charge us a carbon tax because they're subject to a carbon tax on their fuel. Now remember, we need this to grow food in Canada, but any company that manufactures that in Canada gets charged this on the manufacturing process of that, and this gets passed on to us. And wherever we go to buy equipment that's made here in Canada that we use to farm, like these, or these. Any of the manufacturers in Canada that make these are charged a carbon tax on the manufacturing processes that they use to make these things, and then that cost gets passed down to us at the end of the line that are the purchasers of it. So we're still punished by the carbon tax in farming. But you as a consumer are unknowingly punished by the carbon tax as well, because whether you buy this, or require these, you have to pay for that business to have a building out of which they operate, or if they need to keep any of the products that you buy from them in a temperature-controlled environment, they pay a carbon tax on the energy they use to do so and then have to pass that cost on to you. And to get said products to any of these places in a country that's this size, you need to use these, and these. And they run on fossil fuels on which they pay a carbon tax, which they are going to pass the cost along to you. But by the end of 2023, $8 billion will have been collected from small business in Canada from the carbon tax, and only $35 million will be returned back through programs to said businesses. Do you know who gets to pay for the difference of that? You and me as customers, but nobody talks about this when we factor in the little quote saying you get back more than you put in. So we're punished unmercifully as Canadians for driving, heating our homes, and eating, all while being responsible for this much of global greenhouse gas emissions on a faulty national inventory report. Then we're told to, oh, hey, Blue Ball, Then we're told to switch over to unreliable energy sources like these or these, whose components are mostly controlled by these guys, who are also responsible for this much of global greenhouse gas emissions. And not only that, but they're busy with their fingers in our elections here in Canada. Meanwhile, this guy tells us that we need to do more, who is absolutely 100% addicted to traveling on one of these, which emits this much CO2 per hour, and takes a vacation to this place at the cost of this much to taxpayers, and is this year going to give himself a raise of this much money. This guy takes 277 climate change people kind to this country on a plane to the tune of this many dollars for a UN conference on climate change, and stays at a resort that has one of the worst environmental ratings in the area to the tune of $1,200.
Boy, oh boy. If you're listening, we'll kind of break that down for you. So we're going to direct you to our social media channel to watch this, because to me, when I watched this, I was alarmed, because, okay, this is being done in Canada, and Bridget, you said they're trying to implement this in Europe. What are the chances that, this can get implemented here in the U.S.?
Well, they're already almost doing that right now.
There's a lot of push for those types of things. Absolutely. And let's go through the numbers that were blanked out in QDM's video. So he mentioned that as far as Canada is concerned, they only contribute 1.6% of all total greenhouse gases across the world.
1.6%. That's nothing.
1.6. That's nothing. He mentioned that with your vehicles, that they are being charged $50 per ton as a carbon tax for vehicle fuel. $50 per ton for electricity. Now, their leaders like Trudeau, etc., want them to also pay a sales tax on top of what they are being charged for their carbon tax. So it's a double taxation on those items. April 1, so just past April 1st now, there was an increase of $15 per ton on that carbon tax. So your $50 on your vehicles and your electricity just went to $65. This does not in any way, shape, or form take into the account of what this is going to do for food. Reason being that carbon tax is going to be on your semis or any transportation and shipping costs. Fertilizer that's purchased in order to raise your crop. Most of the fertilizer market, especially for Canada, is controlled by Russia, who, by the way, emits 30% of global greenhouse gas. So they're the bigger problem. Canada's being taxed for it. You also get that carbon tax when you buy farm equipment, grain bins, any of those types of things. When he mentioned the dollar amount that's being taxed on small businesses, which includes farms, it was $8 billion. The return on the rebates equated to 35 million. So that was 8 billion to 35 million being returned, with consumers paying the difference. Once again, on your fuel, your electricity, but most importantly, your food, which Canada does raise a fair amount of food with only 1.6% of greenhouse gas emissions.
And if this passed, if something similar to this passed here in the U.S., can you imagine the spike in food prices? Because the price has to be passed down. They're not going to. There's got to be a point where we, as a country, just put our foot. It comes down to elections. But you have got to put your foot down somewhere. That it's too much overreach, and it's not right. And I don't know what is it a control thing? It's ridiculous.
Well, there's a whole lot of theories out there, but if you look at what's been happening in Europe, look at the pushback in the Netherlands and Belgium, where farmers are being told that they have to farm less, that there will be cuts in their supplies, et cetera, in order to eliminate some of the farms. The Netherlands wants to take out a third of active farms right now. There is pushback in France because certain chemistries like neonicotinoids can no longer be used in their sugar beet production, which will essentially eliminate their manufacturing of their own sugar in that particular country, right? Let's switch it over here to the U.S. Has that happened yet? The rumors have been floating around. If you look at what's been going on with banking industries, we are hearing from global banks that as a farm, your environmental steward or your environmental social governance score, your ESG score, may be taken into account as to whether or not you're approved for farm loans. Yet as of just this morning, Steve Hallstrom, who is our general manager CEO, he mentioned that he is seeing reports from JP Morgan and Chase Bank that they are saying, you know what, we've got to fix the economy and stop worrying so much about climate change, it's costing us a fortune. We're going to see people going broke if we're not careful, just like happened in Sri Lanka. We're also seeing it in Paraguay, etc. So this is a lot to digest. I realize that folks are going to need to do their homework on here, and we want you to. We don't want you to just take our word for it. Think all these things through. Dean just mentioned the Farm Bill. We are actively working on a Farm Bill that needs to go in place by the end of the third quarter this year. If you have concerns, now is your time to pick up the phone and talk with your legislators, your commodity groups like your corn growers, your soybean growers, etc., because these are the places to get your voice heard. We don't want to let that opportunity pass you by. So there was my whole dissertation. I apologize for taking all your time.
Well, I'm giving you a standing applause on that. That was beautiful. No,
I'm just waiting for the PowerPoint to come up.
Oh, yeah, it's just my handwritten notes. So.
Oh man, but okay. I mean that could. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. That we've got to worry about fixing the economy before. I mean, especially when it comes down to 1.6% of greenhouse gases are produced. That is so, and you're going to drive from 1.6%. And believe me, farmers, ranchers are doing everything they can, as you know, Bridget, to be good stewards and make and not leave a big carbon footprint. But when the government steps in and tries to overreach. And not only is that good, it's not going to help the economy. It's not going to help food prices. It's going to, like you said, somebody's going broke, and it's
well, and just remember, here in the United States, we currently have the cheapest, safest, and most abundant food supply of any country in the world. Prior to the pandemic, we were only spending 10% of every dollar on food, unlike European nations that were already pushing 60%. And you get to Asian nations like China. Japan was paying 85 to 90% of their dollar just on food costs. So think that through. You don't like your food costs now? This can change what's going on for you. Just a heads up.
Yeah, and you said that is in the Farm Bill, or it is not, Bridget?
There
similar.
Are a lot of conservation. Yeah, there's a lot of conservation practices in the Farm Bill as far as the carbon tax. I'm going to need to go look more deeply. I am not aware of a carbon tax proposal in this Farm Bill.
Okay.
But remember, we have to redo a Farm Bill every X amount of years.
One emailer who sent in, and he's basically saying, with the last 2 years of Biden, just wait to see what happens. He's got the biggest push for environmental change that we've ever heard of. He's got us by the short hairs, and he mentioned that Dean, you and me need to start talking about true weather, temperature, and climate change.
Exactly. And, there's going to be a point, taxation without representation. Are we taught this in school anymore about, the Boston Tea Party? And, if you don't fix history, you're going to repeat it. And it just looks like we're going down that road again. There's going to be a point where people are, they're tired of this. And I can't believe, Canadians I know are laid back. But there's got to be a point where you've just had enough, and I guess the only way is to fix things is to quit voting these people in that are implementing these crazy tactics. Is there climate change? Yeah, there is. I mean, there's no way denying it. But here's the big but: that all this climate push, this push for all solar and all electric, and like QDM said. That's fine and dandy, but where are you getting? This is all run off fossil fuels, and then you're going to have to dig for all the cobalt, and it's just do some research behind this before you hop on. Eventually, I'm sure we'll get there, but you can't push it so quickly. You can't push the issue that quick.
Okay. That's huge. It's these abrupt changes that are going to be painful and hard for a lot of situations. So that's probably the biggest contributing factor to people's fear of what's going on, right? I can understand wanting to make some changes,
sure,
and I get that, but some of the big picture things, for instance, Wotus, Waters of the U.S., that has been called out by many senators and legislators as nothing more than an environmental land grab. And so that is currently being pushed back in states. There's been 34 states, using North Dakota as the district court, are filing to against what the Biden administration is currently wanting to use for a definition of waters of the U.S., because it would take over so much land area that previously wasn't governed under the Clean Water Act and the waters of the U.S. So that's a whole huge discussion in itself, getting to those topics. But understand that, once again, this is the point where we have to vote. We have to make our voices heard. Every time I talk to a farmer group, and I did it just on Monday earlier this week, we have to take our time to reply back to when EPA has open comment periods. We have to do the same thing with our legislators, because otherwise no one's listening to what's practical. And that was at the very end of QDM's video message. If you go back and listen to the whole thing, he said, no one's asking what's the practicality of implementing these items. That's the biggest hang up, right? It sounds like a good idea on paper, but does it actually work? Not necessarily.
And especially, when we're only responsible, or, the ag community is only responsible for 1.6% of all greenhouse gases. And you're going to tax this to the point where food prices go through the roof, and that's going to put a bigger strain on the economy and people's budgets, all for 1.6%. That's nuts. I mean, to me, that's not using common sense. That's power grab. And okay, Justin, you
Voice is always yelling. Who said that? I am not insane. Stop it. Stop talking to me.
Do you have your tinfoil hat?
Bothering you, man?
It's somewhere.
A foil hat?
Yeah, foil hat. All right.
Here's my 2 cents.
Hit me with it.
Here's my 2 cents. And if you have your comments, give us a call, 701-293-9000. COVID was the start to see how much control the government could have on us. Now, let's push this carbon tax. Let's see if we can control them even more. It's just, I don't know. Maybe I'm way off base, but it's way too much of a power grab, way too much control, and it's not going to work. People are eventually going to stand up. You would hope people are eventually going to stand up, and they're just going to be sick of it, sick of the power grab.